The late afternoon sun burned low over the Texas plains, casting long shadows across the ranch. Dust swirled in the warm wind, and the distant hills shimmered in golden copper. On the porch of the old homestead, a young woman stood, her hands trembling at her sides. She wore a dress too delicate for the hard life surrounding her, its fabric thin, fraying at the edges. The rancher, a man who had seen too many seasons and too many hardships, leaned against the wooden railing, squinting at the horizon. His name was Eli McCall, 52 years old, broad-shouldered, with eyes that had witnessed the worst and the best of human nature. He had been expecting a normal day of mending fences and checking livestock, but the quiet tension radiating from the woman made his stomach tighten. "Please, don't look," she whispered, her voice barely carried by the wind. It was soft, strained with fear and shame, yet firm enough to stop him in his tracks. Eli frowned, tilting his head. Her plea wasn't common. People on his ranch were usually blunt, stubborn, and unafraid to demand attention. This was different. This was raw. She stepped closer, her fingers clutching the hem of her gown. The fabric trembled in her grip, revealing the hint of something beneath that no words could explain. Eli's instincts screamed caution. He had seen fear twist into lies, into mistakes that could haunt a person for years. Yet something about the way she held herself, vulnerable yet unyielding, made him hesitate. "Eli," she said again, a slight quiver to her voice. I need you to see." He shook his head, unsure whether to move or stay rooted. The sun dipped lower, the sky streaked with fiery reds and purples, and the world seemed to hold its breath. Eli stepped forward slowly, his boots creaking on the porch boards, every movement deliberate. He could see the tension in her jaw, the way her hands clenched the gown tighter, and he knew she was battling something deep, something she had carried for far too long. When he finally reached out, it was not to pull, not to demand, but to gently lift the edge of the fabric she guarded so fiercely. And then his breath caught. The sight before him was nothing he had expected. Not a trick, not a wound, not a mark of shame, but a revelation that froze him entirely. The color drained from his face. He wanted to speak, to assure her, to break the spell of horror and surprise that held him, but no words came. The young woman's eyes met his, wide and wary, searching his face for any sign of anger or disgust. There was none, only the raw weight of disbelief and the question of whether she could trust him completely. Her lips trembled. I didn't mean for you to see." Eli swallowed hard, his throat tight, trying to reconcile the moment, the truth that unfolded before him, and the flood of memories it had stirred. There was something in this small, fragile frame of a woman that connected to a past he had tried to bury, a history of family, betrayal, and choices he thought he'd left behind. Outside, the wind whispered through the tall grass, carrying the faint scent of rain and the sound of cattle lowing in the distance. The world was still poised between past and present, holding the tension of what was about to happen next. Eli's hand hovered for a moment, unsure whether to draw back or steady her, whether to break the barrier of trust she had just built or protect it fiercely. Finally, he spoke, his voice rough, low, and trembling, though he tried to hide it. It's all right. I see you." Her breath hitched, a mixture of relief and lingering fear. The porch felt smaller, the air heavier, every shadow stretching longer. For a moment, time seemed to stretch, the plains around them fading until there was only Eli and her, a man confronted with something he didn't fully understand, and a woman daring him to understand anyway. And then the first drop of rain fell, splashing on the porch boards, marking the beginning of a storm outside and a turning point neither of them could have predicted. The rain began in earnest, pelting the porch and the dry Texas soil below with a sudden ferocity. Eli McCall stayed close, shielding the young woman with his wide frame as the wind whipped around them. Her gown clung to her trembling body, and the chill of the storm made the moment even more fragile. He could feel her heartbeat, rapid and uneven, pressed against his chest. "Why? Why now?" she whispered, her voice almost lost beneath the roar of the storm. Her eyes searched his, wide with a mix of fear and a desperate hope. Eli didn't answer immediately. Words felt inadequate. Everything about this, her plea, the secret she had guarded, the raw vulnerability of it, left him suspended between disbelief and awe. He reached out slowly, letting his fingers brush against her arm, careful not to frighten her further. "You don't have to hide from me," he said, voice rough but steady, carrying the weight of the plains behind it. "Whatever this is, I can handle it." She shook her head, as though shaking off memories, and stepped back, rainwater soaking into the fabric of her dress. "You don't understand," she said, her tone both pleading and defiant. If anyone knew, her words were cut short by a gust of wind that pushed the rain harder, plastering her hair to her face. Eli's eyes softened. He had seen fear in many forms, the fear of loss, of failure, of betrayal, but never like this. This was a quiet, gnawing terror that someone could see the truth and judge it, punish it. He thought of his own past, the mistakes he had made, the promises broken, and realized that understanding didn't come from words. It came from presence, from showing up when the world had tried to push someone down. "I'm not going anywhere," he said simply, letting her see the sincerity in his eyes. "Not until you're ready." For a long moment she stared at him, her green eyes reflecting the storm and something deeper, a history, a weight, a secret she hadn't dared share. Slowly she exhaled, and the tension in her shoulders eased slightly. She raised her hands, letting him see the entirety of what she had been guarding. Eli's heart ached at the sight, but not with disgust, only a sharp, poignant mix of protectiveness and disbelief. "You trusted me," he said quietly, more to himself than her. She nodded, her lips pressed tightly together, refusing to give him the satisfaction of words. Silence fell between them, broken only by the patter of rain and the occasional low rumble of distant thunder. The storm outside mirrored the storm inside them, the clash of fear, desire, and an undeniable tension neither could yet define. Eli stepped back slightly, giving her space, though his eyes never left hers. "We'll face this together," he said. "Whatever it is, you're not alone." She blinked, unsure if she wanted to believe him. The world had taught her harsh lessons. Trust often came at too high a price. But there was something in the set of his jaw, the steady patience in his stance, that made her pause. Could someone truly see her, every hidden part, and not recoil? Could someone truly care without wanting to control, without wanting to claim? She started, then stopped, words failing. Eli nodded, understanding. Sometimes, silence said more than anything could. He offered his hand. "Come inside. The storm's not going to last, but it's easier if we face it from the shelter." She hesitated, then took it, letting him guide her down the slick wooden steps into the dim interior of the homestead. The warmth from the fireplace greeted them, a small, flickering island of light in the storm-tossed world outside. Once inside, she removed her wet shoes and sank into a chair near the fire, wrapping a threadbare shawl around her shoulders. Eli sat across from her, giving her space but staying close enough that she could feel his steady presence. For the first time, words returned. "I've never shown anyone," she admitted, voice barely above a whisper. "I thought if someone saw, they'd hate me, fear me, or, worse." Eli leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "There's nothing to hate," he said simply. "There's only truth, and the truth doesn't need hiding from me." Her gaze fell to the fire, watching the flames dance, and something in her cracked open a mixture of relief, uncertainty, and a longing for trust. The storm outside had slowed, but the tension inside lingered, stretching thin between them like a wire ready to snap. Eli wanted to speak, to reassure, to take control, but he knew better. This wasn't about control. It was about patience, about letting her decide how much to reveal and when. Hours passed. Rain drummed softly against the windows. Shadows shifted with the firelight, creating a tapestry of movement across the wooden walls. Eli watched her closely but with quiet respect. He didn't rush, didn't press. Every glance, every small gesture of understanding, began to chip away at the wall she had built around herself. Finally, she raised her eyes, meeting his gaze steadily. You're not scared," she said, voice tinged with wonder. He smiled faintly, a shadow of a man who had seen too much and yet found hope in the unexpected. "No," he admitted, "not scared. Surprised, yes, but not scared." She exhaled slowly, leaning back then. "I guess I don't need to hide anymore," she said. Her words were fragile, like glass held in shaking hands, but Eli heard the courage beneath them. He nodded, silently acknowledging the step she had taken, the trust she had offered, and the bond beginning to form between them. The fire crackled, casting golden light over the room, and for the first time since the storm began they were at peace, not completely, but enough to know that whatever came next, they would face it together. Outside, the plains glistened with the remnants of rain, the smell of wet earth and wildflowers rising in the cool evening air. The ranch, old and rugged, seemed quieter somehow, as if it too had recognized the fragile new understanding forming inside the homestead. And as night fell, with shadows stretching long and the stars beginning to pierce the dark, the young woman dared to look at Eli fully, her fear tempered by hope, her trust tentative but real. The firelight reflected in his eyes, steady and unwavering, promising safety, understanding, in the beginning of something neither had expected but both had been silently waiting for. The room was quiet now, save for the soft rustle of the wind outside rattling the cabin windows. Eli stood frozen for a moment, the firelight dancing across his face, highlighting the mixture of shock and awe in his eyes. She sat on the edge of the bed, hands trembling, chest rising and falling rapidly. Neither of them spoke. Words seemed inadequate for the moment that had just unfolded. Finally, Eli took a cautious step forward. His boots creaked softly against the wooden floor, each sound magnified in the tense silence. I didn't expect that," he admitted, his voice low, careful, yet tinged with wonder. She looked up at him, her eyes wide, vulnerability and trust shining through. I've never done this before. I didn't know what to expect either." Her voice trembled, but there was no shame in it, only honesty. Eli shook his head slowly, trying to process the intensity of the moment. "You've got more courage than anyone I've ever met," he said, stepping closer, closing the distance between them. His hand hovered for a moment before brushing gently against her arm, a reassuring touch that grounded both of them. The fire flickered, casting long shadows on the walls. Outside, the first hints of dawn began to pierce through the night, illuminating the room in soft, golden light. She felt it too, a quiet shift, a sense of safety and connection that neither had anticipated. "I was scared," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper, "but it felt right." Somehow, Eli's gaze softened. Fear makes courage meaningful. What we just shared, it matters. More than you realize. He reached out slowly, taking her hand in his. The warmth of his touch spread through her like sunlight breaking through clouds. Minutes passed, and the storm of emotions outside and within the cabin began to settle. They didn't rush. Instead, they lingered in the moment, letting the quiet intimacy grow. She leaned slightly toward him, finding comfort in his presence. Eli didn't move too fast. He let her set the pace, knowing that trust had to be nurtured. "You're breakable," he said softly, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. "I won't ever rush you. Not now, not ever." Her lips curved into a small, relieved smile. I believe you." The room felt lighter, the tension dissolving into something entirely new, understanding, acceptance, and a fragile, budding trust. They sat together, the morning sun gradually filling the cabin with warmth. Outside, the plains stretched endlessly, washed in gold, as if heralding the start of something promising. "You've given me more than I expected tonight," she said, finally meeting his eyes fully. "Not just this, but trust, courage, a chance to start over." Eli's smile was gentle, sincere. "And you've given me the same sometimes. It takes one unexpected moment to change everything." They stayed there, side by side, letting the quiet of the dawn embrace them. Every heartbeat, every breath, was a silent acknowledgement of the bond they had forged. What had begun as uncertainty, fear, and hesitation had transformed into mutual respect, trust, and the beginning of something deeper. The fire dwindled to embers, but the warmth between them remained. Outside, the world was waking, new possibilities stretching as far as the horizon. Inside, two hearts were learning that vulnerability could lead to connection, and that even first times could create lasting, unbreakable memories. Eli gently squeezed her hand, a wordless promise. She leaned against him, feeling the steadiness of his presence. The storm outside had ended, but the storm within had given way to something far more enduring, hope. And as the first rays of sunlight touched their faces, they shared a quiet smile, knowing that whatever the future held, they had faced it together, and that was the most extraordinary thing of all.